Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining Save the Bay for our Climate Conversations webinar, Groundwater Rise Resilience, which we're excited to be co-hosting with Green Action. My name is Haley Currier, and I'm a policy manager at Save the Bay. Save the Bay is a regional organization working to protect and restore the San Francisco Bay for people and wildlife. And we do this through our wetland restoration work on the shoreline, our education programs for young people and community members, and our policy advocacy work where we focus on pollution prevention and climate resilience. Our co-host Green Action is a longtime leader on the issues we'll be talking about tonight. Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice is a San Francisco-based organization that mobilizes community power to win victories that change government and industry policies and practices to protect health and promote environmental, social, economic, racial, and climate justice. They've been advocating that sea level rise and groundwater rise be assessed at all contaminated sites along the Bayshore for years. Their work is community-led and centers marginalized communities. One of our guests tonight will speak more about Green Action later in the program. As the impacts of climate change become more acute, we need to make sure our communities are ready for the impacts of flooding from all sides: sea level rise, intensifying storms, and groundwater intrusion. We know that low-income communities and communities of color, already harmed by decades of racist urban planning and government policies, are on the front lines of these impacts, have the fewest resources to respond, and need to be the leaders and focus of our resilience efforts. To guide our work in the face of these different aspects of flood risk, we at Save the Bay have developed a sea level rise and flood resilience strategy, which my colleague is sharing in the chat now. This strategy outlines key actions we need to take at the local, regional, state, and federal level to address flood risk. This webinar is the third in a series of climate conversations where we've discussed different aspects of flood resilience that we outline in our strategy, and some of the innovative solutions needed to ensure Bay Area communities are ready. In June, we heard from Senator Laird and climate resilient communities about the need for regionally coordinated and equity-centered sea level rise planning and action. In August, we heard from Assemblymember Pappin and partners at the Trust for Public Land and the San Francisco Estuary Institute about the importance of managing storm flooding with green infrastructure, especially at schools. You can see those recordings on our website. Today, we're discussing how rising seas will cause shallow groundwater to be pushed to the surface, and how this additional hazard will be especially catastrophic at toxic sites around the Bay. We welcome your questions. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to ask questions, and we'll do our best to include them in the conversation. If you have any tech issues, you can message my colleague Amy Beth directly. We'll be recording this conversation and we'll share it after the program. Now, I'll turn it over to our moderator, KQED's climate reporter, Ezra David Romero, to introduce our panel. Ezra covers the absence and excess of water in the Bay Area, including sea level rise, flooding, and drought. For nearly a decade, he's covered how warming temperatures are altering the lives of Californians. You have likely heard or seen his work on local stations across California and nationally on public radio shows like Morning Edition, Here and Now, All Things Considered, and Science Friday. His excellent reporting on the issue of groundwater rise and risks from toxic sites has brought much needed attention to the issue. Ezra, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here, and it's nice that this topic is getting such attention, and just want to welcome everyone from wherever you're at your home or your car or anything like that. So I'm Ezra David Romero. I cover sea level rise primarily and flooding in the Bay Area at KQED. I've been here about 2.5 years, 3 years in March. I started off in Fresno and then Sacramento, covering climate, drought, wildfire, all those kinds of things. And when I started here a few years ago, I was like, we live next to this bay, and I wanted to know what's happening with sea level rise and climate change. And Dr. Kristina Hill, who we're going to talk to, has really helped me understand this, and as well as other scientists at UC Berkeley and UC Davis, and from all kinds of organizations. And groundwater rise is percolated up as the thing that's going to impact us way before seas rise over our shores in the Bay Area. And we wrote a series last year called Sacrifice Zones, where we went to 3 communities West Oakland, Bayview, Hunters Point, and Marin City, and talked about the deeper issues that are happening there in these places beyond just the quote unquote climate change. You know, there's like historical racism that has forced people to live where they live, and now they have homes there, and now they have lives there, and now want to make their lives better in those places. And so we wanted to highlight those in a story, in 3 stories, and those ran nationally, across America. And then they actually just won an award at the Northern California Society of Professional Journalists as like a standout environmental story. And I was really stoked about that because those stories highlighted real people's lives and how they are going to move forward, and the agency they are putting forth to thrive. And so let's meet some of them. Dr. Kristina Hill is here. She's the director of UC Berkeley's Institute of Urban and Regional Development. You know, her work is focused on strategies and science for adaptation around sea level rise. Kamillah Ealom is here. She's the Green Action Program Coordinator in the Bayview Hunters Point community. And Terrie Green, she's the Executive Director of the Marin City Climate Resilience and Health Justice. So we'll hear from all of them tonight. But first, let's talk to Dr. Hill. You know, Dr. Hill, let's just start at the base. Like, what is groundwater rise? How will it affect people, the Bay? And I'm remembering how you described it to me with this analogy of a toad dipping underwater. Can you tell me a little bit more about what groundwater is, what groundwater rise is?
Great. Well, I happen to have some slides with me that I can show you. Groundwater is a really interesting thing because in California, we think of it as something we typically have too little of, but near the shoreline, it's a problem that we're going to have too much of it. We learned about this from the Dutch. This is from Rotterdam's Water Plan 2.0, which they finished in 2009. They're a little ahead of us. And they're showing that flooding comes from 4 directions. It comes from the rain, it comes from the river, upriver, and it comes from sea level rise, and it comes from rising groundwater. So let me say a little bit more about why this is a problem, but we've learned from the Dutch that we're going to have to pay attention to it. They know where all their groundwater is, so they have a kind of domesticated groundwater. We've only just begun to figure out where our groundwater is, so we have kind of the wild version, undomesticated. So I use these cartoons to help people think about the way that the sea comes under the land, and that dark blue color represents salty groundwater. It's kind of like, I maybe have advanced my toe story, but I think of it like people putting their toes under a pillow on the couch and then lifting the pillow. When the seawater comes up, it's denser, and so it's going to cause the less dense fresh water to rise. And I'll show that in a couple slides here. So you can see in the second slide, the sea has come a little higher on this marsh. There's a levee here, but that doesn't stop the groundwater from rising. And it comes into sewer pipes that are separated at the joints or maybe cracked. It comes into contaminants in the soil, and it comes into dry creek beds. And all of that happens before there's any flooding at the surface. We'll eventually see even more water in the creek beds, more water in our pipes, which means that the pipes aren't available to do what they're designed for, which is to carry rainwater away or to carry wastewater away. And we'll see more water and increasingly salty water affecting contaminated sites, which mobilizes contaminants in different ways if the water is fresh or salty. So sea level rise is what's driving these changes, and eventually we will see groundwater at the surface. Right now, the groundwater is about 3 feet below the surface in a lot of parts of the Bay Area during the wet season. And by 2070, 3 feet means it could be at the surface in a lot of our communities around the Bay Area, East Oakland, Marin City, parts of Hunters Point, parts of Richmond, parts of East Palo Alto. So a lot of places where people were forced to live by housing covenants and by redlining, communities of color are the most exposed to this problem of rising groundwater. The USGS has shown us through modeling, this is one of their slides, that even if we build seawalls, we may actually exacerbate the problem. Not only will it not prevent groundwater from rising, but it could make it worse right behind the seawall. And a lot of those seawalls are being proposed in places where it's low-lying land and lower income communities of color. I wanted to show this cross-section to explain that one of our go-to strategies for managing high water is pumping. In this scene, I'm showing a building with foundations that are mostly in fresh water, a sewer pipe that goes out to the road. It's a lateral or side sewer that goes out to the main sewer pipe, and some storm sewers and some contamination in the soil. So when people start pumping and the sea level rises, they're actually going to cause a phenomenon called upconing, where salt water rises under the building because of the local pumping that the building owner or manager is doing. And that can cause salt water to get up into the contaminants and into other places where foundations and pipes are not designed to be in salty water. So it's a real problem if that salty groundwater comes up, and yet everyone's go-to is going to be to start pumping. So we really have to be conscious of that and probably set policies to try to prevent it and at least keep track of it. What happens when salty groundwater comes up is that building foundations start to corrode. And I mention this just because it also has an effect on low-income communities where people are living in often older buildings. And if foundations are exposed to salt water that weren't designed for salt water, that could be a real safety risk. In an earthquake event, when some soils, especially soils with high groundwater, have the energy wave come through them, they can behave like a liquid. It's called liquefaction. And in New Zealand, this car dropped into the mud when the earthquake energy wave passed through and had to be dug out when the earthquake was over because the soil, which is normally solid, behaved like a liquid. So foundations that have been damaged by salty water in older buildings, those buildings are at risk of actual physical collapse in case of an earthquake. And then we're seeing water mains breaking in Hawaii as a result of groundwater coming up and down below. And we're seeing pipes filling. Infiltration of pipes is an issue all around the region. And again, if pipes fill with groundwater, when it get a heavy rain like we had last winter, the New Year's Eve storm, not only do we risk putting contamination out into places where people in Marin City have to wade through knee and hip high water, but we're also risking having more surface flooding, more spot flooding, because those pipes aren't available to take stormwater away. So the Coliseum Connections apartment building that flooded, that may have been in part because of high groundwater and saturated soils in East Oakland around the Coliseum. And those folks have not gotten back to their apartments yet. So there are a lot of flooding issues that are related to high groundwater. This is an area on the Richmond shoreline. And what I'm showing here is in the little orange circles, those are open contaminated sites managed by either the Department of Toxic Substance Control or the Water Board. And in the red circle is an area where UC Davis researchers have found fish and crabs that have been heavily impacted by contaminants coming off of the many contaminated sites along that Richmond shoreline at Steege Marsh. And in the light blue, you're seeing the areas where groundwater is going to rise with 3 feet of sea level rise. And in the dark blue, the areas that will be inundated. In this location, the city of Richmond actually has permitted affordable housing, 4,000 units of affordable housing to be built on top of a contaminated site where groundwater is going to be rising underneath that site. So it's a very serious problem that's not evident if you look at surface flooding alone. This is the geology of Richmond, and it shows you these fingers of the old delta that used to come down to the bay there. Those kinds of subsurface geologic features make it more dangerous in contaminated sites that groundwater may rise and move quickly, carrying contaminants to the bay. And these pink lines are all drawn from wells where contaminants have been detected, and they show the direction that contaminants would flow in if they're mobilized by rising groundwater. And it's got a black circle to show where that crosses a sewer line. I'm just going to super briefly say why that's dangerous. And that's because when contaminants enter a sewer line underground, the vapor component of things like benzene and TCE can rise up because it's a gas, and enter a building through a sewer pipe, and then enter the air of the building through an old plumbing seal at the base of a toilet or through cracks in the basement. So it's a very serious problem that should be investigated and tracked, especially again in buildings, in neighborhoods with older buildings. And this is a case where it finally reaches the surface. This is in Alameda at Veterans Court, where we see groundwater come up every king tide. It's become kind of a tourist thing to show up at Alameda Court, Veterans Court in Alameda, and see the groundwater come up at king tide. And so that's my summary slide. Thank you for your attention. This is really a problem there are going to be lots of knock-on effects and lots of effects that happen before we ever see it at the surface. Thanks for asking, Ezra.
Yeah, thanks for answering. We're gonna go to Kamillah Ealom now in Bayview, Hunters Point, and I believe she has some slides as well. Kamillah?
Yeah, let me see if I can share. Okay. And so yeah, just thank you guys for having me here today. My name is Kamillah Ealom. I'm community organizer for Green Action, but most importantly, I'm director for All Things Bayview, which is a community-led nonprofit where we actually educate, galvanize, and mobilize community members and community residents and empower them on these issues. It's like Dr. Kristina Hill said, that for decades and generations, folks have been in the dark regarding the issues of being surrounded by contaminants, being a shoreline community, being a fence line community. And so I'm definitely grateful for our partners and our allies, like Saved by the Bay and Green Action, for highlighting these issues. And also want to thank Dr. Kristina Hill for joining some of my colleagues, community-led scientists such as Dr. Simchai and Dr. Tompkins, as they join us in educating the community on sea level rise and groundwater rise. And I just want to add to what Dr. Kristina Hill was saying, because during the latest storm surges in Bayview Hunters Point, we have seen groundwater rise. You know, it is a historic scene, right? But we have seen groundwater rise in the past year, and almost all of our storm surges that we have had. Just give you a little bit of insight on Bayview Hunters Point. Bayview Hunters Point is the closest community to the shoreline, so we're right there. It's right on the other side of the fence. We are, and as well as Treasure Island, we are a shoreline community and a fence line community. So I'm really excited to be here as we have had this platform and been able to educate our community members, and that's the biggest piece, because they need to be aware that they are a shoreline and a fence line community. So this is where we are now. We have multiplied participation. We have listening sessions, and we have folks coming out. We have scientists, we have experts on sea level rise, and we have folks that is actually coming out to the community and educating the community residents, because they have to be concerned, but they need to know what they're being concerned about. And hundreds and hundreds of years, folks have just been having residents sign on the dotted line without knowing the daily impact. So let's just jump right on into it. Why does sea level and groundwater rise matter, right? It's very important on why it matters. Flooding from sea level rise endangers people from communities living in the San Francisco Bay and ocean. Shoreline communities such as Bayview Hunters Point and Treasure Island. Fence line communities are most vulnerable to the threat of flooding due to the potential spread of toxic and radioactive contamination and disruption of essential services. Fence line communities such as Bayview Hunters Point and Treasure Island. It's very important that we understand the double impact that some coastal communities have, as we are also fence line communities as well. And who lives, it's like, I just want to piggyback right on Dr. Kristina Hill, who occupies these areas and these fence line and shoreline communities? BIPOC members, shoreline communities, fence line communities, low income residents are most vulnerable to the threat of sea level and groundwater rise. Just like I had stated before, you know, for the past year, we've been seeing groundwater rise right in our backyard at Alice Griffith, and as being the closest community to the San Francisco Bay and the shoreline. And so we can get right on into it. Why does it matter? Because sea level rise and groundwater rise. Well, for us, being surrounded by contaminated sites, being closest to the shoreline, it equals a deadly, toxic, and radioactive threat to Bayview, Hunters Point community and Treasure Island. Sea level rise and storm surges cause flooding of many hazardous and radioactive waste. We have the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard Superfund site. That is our closest neighbor right there at the shoreline, and where, you know, radioactive waste is buried right there at the site. We also have homes of Bayview, Hunters Point and Treasure Island residents, transportation infrastructure, utilities, public resources. So we're looking at something way worse than Katrina when sea level rise actually meets groundwater rise. And public resources along the San Francisco Bay waterfront, creating a toxic soup. So that's just what it is. You know, they push most of us, and even again with redlining, Bayview, Hunters Point, we were even pushed closer to the shoreline, where we're less than 100 to 200 feet away from the actual bay. And so systemic racism, redlining, emphasizing and emphasizing an educational divide, digital divide, these are all the components of why these community members, these residents, people like me, I live there. The reason why we are placed in these housing developments without the education and without the awareness of knowing what's to come and what's here today, right now, which is sea level rise and groundwater rise. And so it's not just a Bayview, Hunters Point thing. It's not just a Treasure Island thing. It also, sea level rise and groundwater rise also threatens wildlife, wetlands, parks, electric utility systems, storm water systems, wastewater treatment plants, transportation, public resources, national security, and most importantly, is definitely gravely to the lives of the residents there. And so awareness is extremely important. Education is extremely important. What that does is it gives folks the choice and the option to make the educational choice on whether they want to continue living there for decades, as Bayview, Hunters Point folks have been there for decades, or whether they can plan or even have, you know, their future children plan to move up out of Bayview, Hunters Point. But with them feeling like it's home and, you know, nothing's wrong, folks have been there without even knowing the live threat that faces us every time it rains. So I'm not gonna hold you guys. I do want to express an action alert. What can you guys do for us? Several different things. You definitely contact DTSC. As leaders and directors, as community-led groups, we definitely communicate with DTSC. We know them on first name basis. That's not enough. They put us in a cycle of rhetoric, and it's just not enough. And so we need you all. If you all would please contact DTSC, join us in the fight, and holding them accountable for enforcing the Navy to clean up the radioactive site, right? And to also, if you could please join us, especially if you're a San Francisco resident, please join us in contacting the mayor, our San Francisco mayor, London Breed, and letting them know that we need not only sea level rise projections, but we need emergency preparedness. What do you have prepared for these community members that live in these areas? We also need you all, especially if you live a San Francisco resident, to also contact not only our District 10 supervisor, but your Board of Supervisor, and please let them know that you're aware of the issue, you're concerned about the issue for your fellow neighbors, because again, especially if you live in San Francisco, it's not just a Bayview, Hunters Point thing. It is definitely a San Francisco, a Bay Area thing, and it's a coastal thing. And the Bay Area is a coastal city, a coastal region. And so, yeah, if you could just please contact those folks, definitely will be helpful in what you could do for us. Wait, hold on. Sorry.
Thank you, Kamillah, so much. We have to go to the next person, but some of the action is put in the chat, and go to there if you're interested in that. Our next person we're going to hear from is Miss Terrie Green, her screen about 17 miles north of Bayview Hunters Point in Marin County. We'll hear from her now.
Yes, good evening. I too want to thank Save Our Bay and Green Action for inviting us to be a guest on the program for tonight. When we think about Marin City, we think about all the World War II housing projects in the area, in the Bay. Marin City, we're just right across the highway from the Bay. We are a bayfront community. But one of the things I wanted to talk about specifically is the fact that the work that we do, we're working to save lives in Marin City. When you think about it, and just to give you a little history, I know my parents came here from the South to work in the shipyards. They came from Texas. And they came to work in the shipyards, and they came to help this country to be safe, right? But weren't treated like that, weren't treated like they should have been treated. Marin City was built in about 65 days. 6,000 folks lived here at one point. Marin City was known as a shanty town. Why? Houses were just thrown together. Infrastructure was just thrown together. So you have to think about it. We had lead-based paint. We had kerosene stoves. The roofs were constantly leaking. No paved roads. We had to walk through all the muddy roads. Mind you, we know now, but all of that, well, all those waters were toxic filled. But let's talk about that. Marin City wasn't meant to exist beyond 5 years. The whole focus was for folks to have to move up out of here and go back to the South. But our folks worked here and said, no, we're going to make Marin City our home, even though after the war, folks had money. They wanted to buy houses outside, but Marin City, but due to racial covenants, due to redlining, that wasn't an option. So it's like, are we going to make our community to be a healthy community? One of the things we had to do was to look at why are our folks so sick in Marin City? Why is it that we have a 17 to 20 year difference in life expectancy and really no one seems to care? Why is that? We have the highest chronic disease rate and highest disability rate in Marin. How is it that our children have the highest asthma rate in Marin County? What is really going on? Well, when you take a look at it and we look at the hazard, we look at the contaminants, we look at these challenges, and we have to look at the fact when we think about even air quality. We're 99 on the Cal Enviro screen for traffic. So the air pollution is deep. You take a look at it on the freeway, we have the highest noise level in all of Marin. Both noise pollution and air pollution kills, we know that. But why don't we have a sound barrier? When we take a look at flooding, we know what happened in 2021 when we had 5 feet of flood waters mixed with sewage waters. Dr. Hill talked about that a bit. That's something that happens on a regular basis. A regular basis. What happens? What's going on with our water? We want fresh water, clean water. What is really going on in Marin City? How can this be when we live in a county that's been the healthiest county for the last, 13, 14 years? But it's, oh, by the way, we have this little town called Marin City. No one wants to talk about it. No one wants to talk about the race counts assessment that was done. Race counts. You look at it, Marin County was one for a long time. Now they're number 3, and they boast that they're number 3, but you have to understand number 3 is at the bottom of the pile. Number 3 when it comes to racial covenants, racial justice, racial equity. That means that they totally look the other way when it comes to Marin City. We look at Marin City and we know it was a march. We know a lot of dumping took place and waste the waste. When folks went to the dump in San Rafael and the dump said to them, oh, we can't take that, go down to Marin City. And that's where the dumping took place. After World War II, a lot of dumping took place from the war in Marin City. But you know, all of it could be cleaned up. What do we need? We have some things that, I have some things, 3 things I want to share. Number one, we need to be incorporated because we care about the people that live in Marin City. We need to be an incorporated community. And so we need help. We need folks to say, you know what, we will help you become incorporated. Number 2, we need Gavin Newsom, to declare a state of emergency when it comes to Marin City. And then call in all of his troops. Call in DTSC, call in the Water Board, call in DWR, call in everybody. Amass all of the funds together to say, you know what? Marin City deserves an opportunity for people to live. Yes, this county we live in, they have turned a deaf ear, closed their eyes, and pretend that we don't exist. But yet, I heard Dr. Bullock he was talking about medical genocide. But if you talk about and you think about the fact that our people are dying early, what is that if it's nothing but purposeful genocide? They want us out of here so bad that they will allow these injustices to continue. That's not right. So we need Governor Newsom. If some of you all could pick up the telephone and call him and say, hey, you need to come on down to Marin City. Bring your team, bring them down, you know, and I know this is bold what I'm saying. I know probably nobody else is talking about it. But you know, he has at his disposal all the agencies that could come down and help clean up Marin City. We have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice, right? We have that right, but you know what? We want to be able to realize that right. So what can you do? You could call in and say, hey, pay attention to Marin City. And then the third thing we need funding. We need to be able to hire the scientists and engineers. We need capacity building. We need to be able to amass a whole population of technical experts to come in and help us so we could sit at the table and be able to make decisions about our community. Unfortunately, it's not the table of this county because they don't want us at the table. So Governor Newsom, we need your help. You could declare a state of emergency and we could change what's going on in Marin City. We could change it for the better. So those are the 3 things. I know it's bold. I know I probably shocked some of you all. But you know what? We need help here. We want to live just like everybody else. But when you have to walk through contaminated waters, you know, that's nothing but death.
Thank you, Terrie, for your time and sharing all those thoughts. And we have stories on both of Bayview, Hunters Point, and Marin City on KQED when it comes to groundwater rise and flooding in those communities. And we talked to DTSC and all the agencies involved. So if you want a broader scope, you can look at those stories. We're going to take some time now to do a little conversation for about 20 minutes with everyone on here. And you kind of answered my first question already around solutions and what you want to happen. So we're going to skip that one. But I want to ask Terrie and Kamillah, like, what are the barriers to implementing your asks or your solutions? What are the barriers in place right now? Maybe go to Kamillah first.
Racism. I mean, that's just what it is. I'm telling you, you know, folks have been doing the work for so long, and again, we're coming in, and folks still don't even know that they're a shoreline community, right? It's just, I mean, the light has been off on purpose. You know, folks don't even know that they're a fence line community. They don't even know about sea level rise. They don't know about contaminated sites. So it just becomes systemic, right? We're going against the system, right? And so our biggest fight is the racial divide. Then we have all types of divides, and then of course funding, but it all comes from, we have to go through bigger organizations that's non-community led just to have platforms like this. And so yeah, I'd like to join Terrie. These communities need funding directly. We need it because we definitely know that there's a lack of trust, right? So in order to get folks about their homes and involved, you need one of their own to get them out and pull them out. In order for them to understand the seriousness and the urgency, you definitely need to build trust. And so yeah, I definitely feel like we need funding. That's the power that that we could utilize, right? Because again, systemic racism, is a hard fight that has been inserted even in our own lives for decades, to where we feel like we deserve this type of environment. And so, yes, we definitely need, I'm so thankful to be here with Terrie, come together, but also we need funding for the communities directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamillah. Terrie, do you want to add anything about,
I mean, Kamillah, yes, Kamillah, so she's so right. When racism plays a big factor. When it comes down to it, it's about race. And the thing is that you're not invited to the table, but if you are invited, it's like, but no one expects you to have anything to say. Even though you come and you say, hey, look, I've talked with some scientists and they've said X, Y, and Z. They will not take it. They will not take your recommendations. And that's why when we take a look at it, that's why I'm calling for somebody has to be bigger than them. And that's the governor. When I look at it, the governor, he's just going to have to step in, because this California, we should not have communities like Marin City, Hunters Point, Richmond, West Oakland. I can go Treasure Island. We should not have communities that's steeped in contaminants and that be okay. And so, I mean, race matters.
Yeah.
Matters.
Kristina, you've worked in these communities, and these two communities are not isolated in this, right? I mean, you and I have talked about your grad students are working on like mapping this out around the entire Bay Area. Can you talk to me about the scope of this problem? I mean, we're not just talking about two places, right? It's thousands, something like that.
That's right. So we did a study that was published this fall, and we mapped the areas that are going to see rising groundwater based on the U.S. Geological Survey's projections, not our own. And we found 1,400 plus sites that are considered open and have active contamination or are being studied and suspected of having active contamination. There are 5,000 sites, more than 5,000 sites, that are either open or closed. And closed means they're administratively closed, but there may be some residual contamination. And to Miss Terrie's points about Marin City, there are sites we don't even know about. Marin City has been asking for sites to be investigated for a long time. And one of the best things that come out of this call would be if somebody would investigate the sites the community believes, reasonably so, may be contaminated in Marin City. But it is in the thousands. And they are more likely to be open sites in socially vulnerable communities than in more wealthy, whiter communities.
Someone was asking for the link, so I'm going to put the link to the story in the chat because I accidentally deleted that. But so these 5,000 sites, can you talk to me about the types of contaminants, like what we're talking about, like the range of what's in the ground there and what that can do to people?
Yeah, there's a wide range. Some sites, like the Zeneca site in Richmond, it's like a cornucopia of chemicals, everything from pesticides to persistent organic pollutants and volatile organic chemicals, even some radioactivity found on the Blair landfill adjacent to that site, which apparently originated at the Zeneca site. So our whole region has a lot of chlorinated solvents, things that cause cancer in human and animal bodies. Persistent organic pollutants, things that can be in the air as well as in the water. PCBs are present. And as I said, radioactivity, which isn't safe in any quantity.
At the regional level, are you seeing any progress on this? You know, you've highlighted this over the past few years, but is there any progress made on, you know, pushing for these cleanups or to do something about this?
Yeah, I would say the two big steps that people have taken is the water board has required all landfills to have plans to deal with rising groundwater around the San Francisco Bay. So it's only the San Francisco Bay district that's required that. Should really be statewide because Humboldt Bay also has problems with this. But the DTSC, the Department of Toxic Substance Control, has put out a draft policy that a lot of us have commented on to try to come up with a way to study and plan for rising groundwater and sea level at toxic sites that they manage. And again, that should be something that's shared by the water board. I wish the two agencies would cooperate more. I know that they have different mandates, but that would really serve the public of California if they would develop the same aggressive efforts to understand how groundwater is rising on these sites.
For Terrie and Kamillah, has there been any positive momentum around this in your communities? I mean, we've been talking for years about this, but is there any action that's been positive in your communities when it comes to this?
Yeah,
Well,
I just want to.
Go ahead, come on.
I just wanted to add on to Dr. Kristina. I mean, it's community. What she's talking about is receipt of community-led work. You know, with Green Action, Marie Harrison Foundation, Bayview Hunters Point community members, all things Bayview. You know, we are the ones that get these agency folks together on a monthly basis. We have them in the same room and we ensure that they come up with these projections. And we are the reason why we have these projections to this day. And so again, the community is the reason how and the reason why we have the success that we have today. And our partners are, you know, Green Action, you know, our allies, 1,000 Grandmothers, you know, we have some folks that have been in this fight for decades, you know, like again, the late Marie Harrison, who's done this work before me. She's definitely done a lot of the groundwork. And so again, I quickly noticed the key, and that's getting the community involved. They listen to the community, the groundswell of support of the community. That is how we are getting things done. Educating the community, you know, turning it from community-led to community-owned work. We have scientists, toxicologists, you know, but again, I feel like our successes comes from the backs of the communities, spearheaded, like we said, because of the racial divide, spearheaded by our overhead allies, and which we are aiming to change that as well. But yeah, we'll take what we can get, you know, for now. But definitely, we do have some successes, but it is definitely on the backs from the communities. Thank you.
Yeah, Terrie, you last year or a year and a half ago when we talked, you had done an action with students to send messages to the governor to to do something about this. Did you ever get a response?
No, we didn't, but I had an opportunity to be at an event about 3 weeks ago with the governor and his wife. Actually, it was for her. And I had a chance to go up to him and talk to him. And I asked him I only needed 30 minutes of his time. So he said he was going to call me. But with all the folks on this line tonight, if you all call him, remind him. He said, yes, I'm going to have a meeting with you. But I wanted to also add to what Dr. Hill was talking about when we take a look at Marin City and the fact that we had 5 kerosene stations, 2 cleaners, 2 gas stations. If we even just talk about that and we talk about the 2017 flood study, drainage study, that talked about our pipes being too little, being cracked, corroded. If we could talk about those things, the fact that we have water pipes and sewage pipes right next to each other. But the thing is, we still are using some of those old pipes from World War II today. And you asked, has there been any movement? Well, we took that information, but we also began to ask again. We wanted to know the public health impacts here. Why is it that folks are so sick in Marin City? Why? We had to do a water assessment, to do a survey of 286 folks. And they talked about the color, the brown water, you name it, they talked about it. So we had to do water testing, and it's interesting, some of the things that came out of it. But in the meantime, we started talking to the Marin Municipal Water District and saying, hey, we need some new water pipes in Marin City. And that took us about 4 years, but finally we came together, wrote a proposal to get together. And so now, starting in March of next year, we'll be getting 40% of new water pipes. You know, the goal is always 100%. Now, that's a big deal. We've also been working now with BACMID and EPA. We're getting ready to place some air monitors in the community. We're also getting ready to do some indoor air filters we will be putting in the community as well, starting in the spring. So we've had some traction, some great things, but we have a long way to go. And the way it's going to be turned around again, is not, hey, we have the Board of Supervisors, again, we're unincorporated, and we need voices over the county. And whose voice is that? That's Governor Newsom, to say, you know what, I'm going to step in and do something about this. Yes.
Dr. Kristina Hill, you have been working in these communities, you know, Richmond, Marin City, Bayview, Hunters Point, West Oakland, other places for a while now. And I'm sure there's people on this call who are scientists or who are different part of organizations, you know, who might want to get involved. Do you have any thoughts on how they could get involved, or like maybe even best practices?
Well, I hope that everyone would help advocate for better science-based modeling of groundwater around this area. All we have right now is the USGS, which was a statewide, very low resolution, process-based modeling study of how sea level is going to affect groundwater. So we really need watershed scale studies that would look at clusters of waterborne and DTS sites at a time, several sites at one time. And I hope that people will help advocate for that, and maybe if they have the capacity, get involved in supporting that work in some technical way. I know that Save Palo Alto's Groundwater is a pretty high capacity group. I know that folks in Richmond are pretty high capacity, but we really need people who can do this kind of modeling. And it should be done by the same people with the same method over and over again, so we can consistently look at our region and figure out what we think is really going to happen. The problem won't happen the same way everywhere. So it really needs to be studied in a consistent way. And I think that should be by government.
Yeah. You know, there's a lot of questions in the chat about levees and living levees. Can you talk, Kristina Hill, a little bit about, like, you know, will this issue of groundwater rise be there if, say, a levee goes in? I know in San Mateo County, they're talking about levees. I mean, everywhere they're talking about levees around the Bay. So does this negate groundwater rise?
Yeah, so a levee doesn't prevent groundwater from rising on the backside. The Dutch know this, and they have an extensive network of pumps that go with their levees. But their pumping is done in a shallow, kind of horizontal way, not with deeper wells. And that's what we need to do. We need to think about how to manage areas with high groundwater or heavy rain in a kind of shallow pumping way, not deep pumping, because we don't want the land to sink. That's what happened in New Orleans. People pumped and the land collapsed downwards several feet, or in San Jose or in the Central Valley. So we have to learn from the mistakes other people have made. And I'm a little bit worried that the ambition to build levees is misguided in the sense that it's not going to solve the flooding problem on the inland side.
Yeah, it could create little lakes or little more big ones on the other side of these levees.
We're going to create a new problem, which is pumping, potentially subsidence. And when there's a mechanical failure of a pump, who lives there and is going to be affected by that mechanical failure? You know, we're not too good at maintenance in this country.
Another question is around what should be done next, especially around these toxic sites. You know, you highlighted these 5,000, you know, 1,400 or so of them active. What is your recommendation? What should be done about these sites? Should it be cleaned up immediately? what would you like to see done with these places?
Yeah, well, like I say, they need to be studied. I'm trying to raise the alarm about these sites. It may turn out that 50 are the real problem out of 1,400, or it may turn out that it's 2,000 that are problematic. And we can't answer that question until we do a good job of modeling how sea level and groundwater are going to interact. And now it's really time to look hard. And we've raised the issue. Now we need to do the science.
We just have a couple moments left. Terrie and Kamillah, where would you like this conversation to go? Do you have any actionable items you'd like to give out to the public? Maybe Terrie, you want to go first?
Sure. We definitely need to have more assessments done. You know, we continually, Marin City Climate Resilience, always, we get phone calls, we get folks coming up to us because mold and mildew just runs rampant in the houses in Marin City. And, you know, we have to deal with it. I mean, just the other day, we just had, I mean, it rained and we had what, about 3-4 inches of rain just real quick. You know, the water level is already so high, but it's toxic. It's toxic, you know. All I can say is that, you know, we're working on these issues. We need some assistance. We need assistance from the higher authorities. When I look at Marin County, I mean, the Board of Supervisors last year had a $86 million surplus, but hey, what comes to Marin City, you know? And if we aren't the ones out there trying to, I'll just use a term my father used, hustle and get some grants to do things, it's not gonna happen. For years, the Department of Public Works hadn't put a dime in Marin City. Right now, when you come in Marin City, there's no drainage system there. And you wonder why we have 5 feet of flooding. There are some things that could be fixed up right now. And what, again, with some assistance from the state, federal government, we can fix these issues. We can fix them. You know,
what would you like to add?
it's Ezra, all I can say is when they went to build, it was time to build the shopping center, they dug down 3 feet and oil just went everywhere. A lot of these sites aren't cleaned up. They're not, they haven't been cleaned up, just covered up. And we have to deal with this.
Thank you, Terrie, for sharing. We got to move on to Kamillah's responses before we end it.
Yeah, just real quick, I'm not going to hold you because we definitely fight the same fight. Bayview, Hunters Point, Marin City, actually all the shoreline communities in the Bay. But please join us. Please join the community-led efforts and initiatives from All Things Bayview. We are in the process where we're partnering up with UC Berkeley and doing some soil sampling. It's already in the works, so please support that. Support us, you know, through our civic engagement with DTSC and with the Navy. You know, the Navy gave us the direct green light that if we get these soil samples tested, they will look at it and look at it legitimately, you know, and accept the data. And so really excited for that because we already had the partnership. So now it's just on go.
Amazing.
And so please just support All Things Bayview. You know, please continue to support Green Action and just support all the community-led work. Because again, the most important thing what caused Katrina's people didn't know. Right. So even if, you know, we, you know, support sea level rise projections, the residents need to know that they're surrounded. It's about 85,000 of them. So thank you so much. Please support community-led work in Bayview, Hunters Point and Treasure Island. Because just let me just say this, even I make sure that I mention Treasure Island because Treasure Island, they don't even have the community leadership. So we make sure that we speak on behalf of them and we carry their fight with us. And so that's another issue within itself as well, because they are definitely, their housing is at stake. They're definitely, you know, in a worse situation, but we definitely carry the fight with them. So please support community-led and community-owned work. And thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for speaking today. If you want to have more information about this, KQED has a bunch of stories that talk about the complexity of this. It's both local, regional, statewide to make any decision happen here. So I'm going to pass it back over to Green Action and to Save the Bay. But thank you all for coming and joining. And great to see you, Terrie, Kamillah, and Dr. Kristina Hill.
You too, everyone.
Thank you so much to all of our amazing panelists. Thank you, Ezra, Dr. Hill, Kamillah, and Ms. Terrie, for both your time tonight and also your incredible work on a daily basis. And I want to thank our audience so much for joining us tonight. You had so many thoughtful questions, such amazing engagement on this topic. We'll really do our best to share the questions and the answers in our follow-up materials so you can learn more. And if you'd like to ensure more programs like this happen in the future, you can donate to Save the Bay and to Green Action, and we'll drop some links into the chat now. And if you heard something important tonight and you'd like to share this webinar with others, you'll receive a recording in our follow-up email. We'll also share some of the articles and resources that were mentioned by our panelists and make sure you have access to all of their great work, as well as the ways to get in touch with them, follow their work, and take action alongside them and us in the months and years to come. And if you'd like to provide any feedback on this event, we're going to send out a survey as well. We're always looking to improve our programming. As Kamillah and Ms. Terrie said, please don't forget to take action and ask DTSC to protect our communities from toxic waste sites. And you're also invited to join Green Action for a press conference about toxic site cleanup at Bayview Hunters Point this Thursday at 11 a.m. We'll share more information in the chat. Save the Bay will continue hosting virtual events like this throughout 2024. So sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. You'll also find opportunities to volunteer on the shoreline. We have queer and BIPOC affinity group events, including a queer planting day this Saturday, December 9th. We also have a full community planting day on Saturday, December 16th. Once again, thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you all for joining us. Good night.